to do is share a few fun facts about Pastor Mike. And I know a lot of you know him, so if you know these answers, just shout them out, okay? His heart is trimmed in purple and gold because he's a member of this fraternity. Okay. In his free time, Pastor Mike takes to the open road on his big boy, which is Harlem Davidson. Okay. And then Pastor Mike hails from this Nassau, Long Island town, which boasts a great mall that also has the name Roosevelt. All right, y'all got it. 3 for 3. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Pastor Michael A. Walrond. Thank you.
Good morning. It's early enough for us to be awake, but too early to really be fully awake. So glad to see everybody here, the FCBC folk who came up this morning. It is indeed a privilege, a pleasure for me to be here and to talk about issues that are critical to me, pertinent to me. I want to thank Mr. Lynch, Bill Lynch, for this opportunity. Tremendous man, tremendous influence now in my life. I count him as a mentor to me, and to Bill and to Socials and all those who work to make this possible in these breakfasts. Yesterday I spoke with Sabrina, and she said that they wanted me to talk about what is the church's role or response in this current economic crisis. And it's amazing because there's several ways to address this issue. So I'm going to talk about that, and then try to talk about some personal things. Before I say anything, I'm thankful for my wife who's here, Dr. Lakeisha. Who's here, and all the FCBC members. You know, it's amazing because whenever our community, African American community, is in crisis, and especially the kind of economic crisis we're facing now, the church always becomes in some ways a barometer of that. Some good and some bad. I read an article the other day that said as membership increases in many churches, offering is decreasing in many churches, which would make sense because when people find themselves in stress or distress, we get real religious. We find our way back to church, especially when we're trying to find answers to many of the issues that we confront, that plague us, that are hindering us, I believe, from being who we ought to be. We find our way to church. But many churches across the country right now are bearing the marks of this recession and this hardship. Because although membership, again, is going up, many churches' ability to be financially engaged in the community is taking a hit. Because more people are coming, but unemployment is still high. People's benefits are running out. And it manifests itself in the church. The church lives off of the giving and offering of the community. And so the community is struggling. Inherently, the church will struggle in many ways. And so the church's response to issues of financial hardship are really dependent on the capacity of the church. Many years ago, a study came out, many years ago, by Lawrence Maya and Sierra Lincoln that said the average African-American church has a membership of under 200 members. And the average salary of a pastor in an average African-American church in this country is less than $25,000 a year, with no benefits. Now, for many of us who live in these metropolitan cities, it is hard to conceive of that, especially when we have so many large churches and facilities, or at least a large edifice. And our churches are not, strong in terms of numbers. But it's hard to conceive, so that means the average pastor is struggling. The average pastor is having a hard time trying to make ends meet, and that church with 200 or less members is going to be hit hard, and they're going to have a hard time trying to service the needs of the community. Again, if they're not financially able to even support a pastor, difficult to infuse itself in the life of the community. So churches like a FCBC are not the norm. to have a church of 6,000 members or so is not the norm. But even with that, we still struggle in many ways too, because again, we're a manifestation of the people who are part of that congregation. And as people struggle, as people hurt, then the church takes some kind of hit as well. And so one of the things I think churches across the board would want to do but find themselves challenged in these times is, one, how do you begin to service the needs of the people? At 1 Corinthian, some of the things we do are, more importantly, we have some members here from that, our food pantry. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, there was a write-up about our food pantry in the Huffington Post, and the title was Harlem Church Seeks to Help the Unemployed. Because we find that there's been an increase, of course, in these times of people who are in need of basic necessities, food being one of them. So we don't serve necessarily hot meals, but we provide groceries for many. And sometimes between 300, 400, 500, 600 people come, line up, sit there for a long time just to get groceries. Why? Because many people are being helped by this service, because the community is still struggling. Not only do we have the food pantry, but in the summers, we do the summer youth feeding program. And the reason we did that is because a couple of years ago, I was reading an article that many young people in the city will have a hard time eating because their only meal for many of them came in school. Once school is over, how are they going to eat? And so that was what spawned us to say, okay, let's feed kids in the summer. So we paired up with some programs here in the city that were seeking to do summer youth feeding. And it was amazing to me how few churches were actually trying to engage in this. And so we did the summer youth feeding. We do the whole giving out clothes. We do all of those things. But the issue is that many churches are strapped. Many churches in the South are in foreclosure. People have lost their buildings, have lost the capacity to worship because they did not own them, so mortgages are gone. I mean, it's difficult. There was a time when banks would lend to churches because the banks, and this is what I read, you only had a 1% default rate with churches. That 1% has now gone to 18%. So now banks are even reluctant to lend churches money. There was a time they knew churches were guaranteed to get those financial resources. Not the case anymore. So now you have churches that are having financial hardships that can no longer get loans from banks. The membership is not able to contribute the way it once did. And you see the decline of many of our churches in our community. And that's what makes it so difficult to engage in the kind of ministry. So there's some tangible things that churches can do. What I found a greater issue, I think, a deeper issue, is that it's not that churches can't do the work. In many of our communities, churches have become irrelevant, which leads to a deeper crisis. Why have churches become so irrelevant? In many of our communities, churches are really, I guess, part of the decorations of the community, I would say. And in many ways have become relics in the community. Large buildings with low memberships. Large buildings that are unable to attract young people. And that is a challenge in many of our churches. At FCBC, the majority of our membership, the bulk of our membership right now, the largest demographic, is between 21 and 45, which is strange because many churches have a difficult time attracting those people. So a person is often asked, well, what are you doing? What kind of programs are you doing? What kind of cutting-edge ideas? And it's not really that. It is how do you make the church relevant. That means you must be willing to shroud the church of many of its traditionalisms that don't speak to the current situation. Now, let me ask a question beyond the FCBC people. How many of us have regular attendance of church? And are ready, beside the FCBC church. And are engaged in the life of the church beyond the Sunday morning. Okay. So, what is it that attracts us to many churches? Well, the sermons. But for many people, it's the environment. For many people who grew up in church, it is the tradition. But many young people are not drawn by that. Now, before I came to New York City, I was pastoring in Durham, North Carolina for 8 years. Was living there for 11 years. And something radically different I saw there than here. In the South, and many of us from the South, church is woven into the fabric of the cycle of living. So that to not go to church seems strange. Even if one is not completely engaged in life of the church, not attending church is strange because church is woven into the fabric of the community. Whereas in cities like New York, all those churches are present everywhere. They're not as critical to the fabric of the community. And more than that, in cities like New York, the city I tell people, distractions, church is not really a primary focus. So when I came to New York City, I found myself doing something that was a strange phenomenon, especially coming from the South. And that was baptizing many older persons. Because these were older persons who are now coming to church for the first time. were never involved in church. I'm talking about 40 years old, 50 years old, 60-year-old, who are now engaging in church. Whereas in the South, you found yourself dealing with more young people who were just coming because that was the expectation. That was the norm. Up here different. So when you have people who are coming to church late, you have communities that are looking for churches to be relevant, and you have churches that are struggling for survival and being relevant. It's a strange time for many of our churches. But the issue again is the church they gravitate to. Does it speak to who they are? Does it make sense for who they are? Is it seeking to empower them and transform them and push them to be their better selves? That's what we try to do in so many ways. We try to not just become another institution. We try to be a life-giving source in this community. We try to be an empowering entity, not an enabling one. And we try to make people or create an idea to forge a community that gels us and binds us together. And I think that's what makes us who we are. We've gone in 7 years from about 300 and so on members to close to 6,000, which is unprecedented. But not because of just programs, but because of the forming of a community of dreamers, a community of people who believe in something beyond themselves, a community of people who believe that there is a possibility to live a life of authenticity and being genuinely human and in an empowering way. And so it has been a pleasure for me to lead that community, to be a part of that community. But I find that many people are looking for that. Many people are groaning for that environment. Many people are yearning for that kind of relevancy. And that's what we find. And that's what we've been doing. And it's been truly empowering for us to make the church relevant in these times, to make the church a galvanizing force in these challenging moments, and to make the church something that people can see as a source of transformation and not just an icon in the community, an irrelevant relic, an idea, a tradition, but something that empowers and gives life beyond the normal expectations of church. Well, what are those normal expectations? Well, oftentimes churches have been built on being salvation machines, I say. In other words, we're concerned about saving souls. So the catchphrase for many people who've never been in church, someone encounters you from church and says, look, are you saved? Now, you'll never hear anyone from FCBC say that. Well, I don't know, never, but very, very rarely. Because when I'm asked the question, are you saved? I say, saved from what? That is a language that has shaped many of our congregations, but it doesn't really make sense. Are you saved? No, that's not the issue. But most churches are about saving souls. Well, here's the problem. How do you save souls, and then those souls that you seek to save find themselves struggling with living? So oftentimes our churches are marked by one thing: disembodied faith. In other words, we want to save their souls, but when you leave this church, not concerned about your living beyond the walls of this church. Your soul is saved, but your rent not paid. Your soul is saved, but you have no job. Your soul is saved, but you can't raise your children.